Welcome to this video on the top 10 vampires of House and Clan Tremere. The Tremere predate Vampire the Masquerade itself, first appearing in the game Ars Magica as a branch of the Order of Hermes. Fearful of the loss of magic in the world, the Tremere, those who are awakened mages, sacrificed their souls to escape death, becoming vampires. Due to the Tremere's rather rapid and brutal rise to power, their destruction of Clan Salubri, and their secretive ways, the Tremere are generally not well liked or trusted among either the Camarilla or the Sabbat. Given the Tremere's more distasteful practices, it's a position with some justification. But without further ado, here are the top 10 vampires of Clan Tremere. Number 10. Etrius. Etrius was born near Gothenburg, Sweden in 850 AD. His father had been a Viking, but became one of the first converts in Sweden to Christianity thanks to the ministrations of the German bishop Angsar. Angsar had also made an impression on the 19-year-old Etrius, who believed that he had all the makings of a future saint. Assured of his own holiness, Etrius forgave himself the shortcomings that he condemned in others. He desperately wanted to join the priesthood as his first step on the road to beatification, but in the still pagan Sweden this was not possible. So Etrius' father put him on a ship bound for Rome, where he could take holy orders. But while on the journey, Etrius' ship was waylaid by Vikings. He was taken and sold as a slave in Constantinople. None of this, however, troubled Etrius much, and he remained confident in God's plan for him. His buyer was none other than Tremere. Tremere sensed the magical potential in Etrius, and that he could be awakened to true magic. Etrius would become Tremere's first apprentice after his failed attempt to usurp the Order of Hermes. Etrius' loyalty to Tremere was matched only by his arrogance, an arrogance that was magnified as he retained his youthful vigor thanks to the life-extending magics of Tremere. In 920 AD, Etrius completed a small but solid chantry in Vienna, where he was the nominal but oft-absent master. In 955, Etrius violated the Hermetic ban against magi interfering in mortal politics when he aided Otto the Great, Duke of Saxony, King of East Francia, and future King of Italy and the Holy Roman Emperor, in his battle against the pagan Magyars at the Battle of Lichfeld. Etrius' goal was to cultivate favor with the Austrian Church and the nobility by bringing an end to the Magyar invasions. In 962 AD, Etrius demonstrated his loyalty to Tremere by killing an informer who had knowledge of a Tremere plot against a rival magus. Etrius justified the deed by stating that if the disciples of Christ had been willing to kill for him, he need never have been crucified. You know, it's a good thing Etrius decided to go into magic because his understanding of Christian theology leaves a great deal to be desired. Which brings us to Etrius and his most hated rival, Goratrix. The two men met when Tremere took on Goratrix as an apprentice. Goratrix helpfully pointed out to Etrius his self-serving hypocrisy, which only further caused disdain between the two. Etrius, believing that Goratrix intended to usurp Tremere, took up the opposite position of Goratrix on nearly every issue. In 980, Etrius was the second lead in Goratrix's ritual to consecrate the new chantry at Ceoris, and used the chaos around Ponticulus's near spoiling of the ritual as an opportunity to cause Goratrix significant problems later. In 996, Etrius discovered that the force of magic in the world was diminishing, and that with it, the Tremere's life-extending magics would eventually fail, though he did not identify the cause. As a possible solution, Etrius turned to diabolism and the summoning of demons. Yet he ran into the ultimate paradox of infernalism. Any demon weak enough to be bound and summoned is too weak to give an infernalist what he truly desires, and any demon powerful enough to give an infernalist what he wants is either too powerful to be bound or too treacherous to abide any agreement with the infernalist. Yet in the course of Etrius' brief career as an infernalist, he sacrificed countless animals, newborn babies, and over 24 peasant virgin women to try and appeal to the ruinous powers of hell. In 1003, Etrius, armed with what he believed were the true names of 3 demon princes, sacrificed another 8 virgins and opened a portal to hell to attempt to bind the demon princes into the service of House Tremere. Instead, he got a scene that would not have been out of place in the movie Event Horizon. By the time Etrius managed to slam the portal shut again, 2 mages, 4 apprentices, and half a dozen retainers had perished under the claws, fangs, or hellfire of demons, and an entire floor of Ceoris had been rendered useless. When Etrius was dragged before a conclave to justify his actions, he first attempted to blame Goratrix. When Tremere ordered him to withdraw the accusation, Etrius then claimed that the demons had addled his senses. Each mage in attendance voted for Etrius's death for putting not only their lives but their souls in peril. Yet Tremere overruled them all, stating that he had advised Etrius, guided his theory, and sanctioned his experiment. Whatever fate must befall foolish Etrius must also fall on the one who guided Etrius in his folly. The conclave relented, and Etrius, eyes slick with tears of joy and gratitude, became Tremere's creature forever. In 1022, when Goratrix completed the preparations for the ritual that would convert the inner council into vampires, Etrius advised caution to Tremere. When Etrius realized what Goratrix had turned them into, he and Calderon called for Goratrix's death on the spot. Yet Tremere seemed strangely unperturbed, as if everything had gone according to his own plan. The inner council went into seclusion for 4 years, until they could master their newfound vampire existence. In 1026, Tremere summoned his counselors for strategies to counter the Tzimisce. Goratrix called for a mass embrace of House Tremere to give them much-needed numbers. Etrius counseled for slowly subverting and then embracing hand-picked mages, whose loyalty could be assured prior to the embrace. In 1037, after Goratrix attempted to kill Etrius in Thessalonica through a mortal mage, Tremere bound the entire Council of Seven to his will through a blood bond, in what would become the cornerstone of the Tremere Pyramid. Tremere then took Etrius with him on a journey with 2 purposes. First, Etrius and Tremere traveled to develop a system of hermetic magic powered not by vis, or arret, as they used when they were alive, but blood. This system of formulaic magic would become Tremere Thaumaturgy. The second purpose was to survey the landscape of vampire society and gather intelligence. It was in this journey that Etrius first learned of diablerie. Etrius and Tremere identified, located, and devoured poorly protected Methuselahs to enhance their own power, along with that of the inner counselors. In 1133, Etrius discovered the tomb of Solet, the Salubri Antediluvian, and joined his master in slaying the grandchild of Cain. The act has haunted Etrius for centuries, not because he aided in devouring the antediluvian soul, but because it seemed too easy to him. As Tremere was dragged into torpor to struggle with the soul of Solet, Etrius became the de facto head of Clan Tremere, a position that has taken its toll on Etrius, though he has risen to the challenge. When Ceoris was destroyed by the Gargoyle revolt, Etrius returned to his Vienna Chantry with Tremere's torpid body. Since then, Etrius has watched over the sleeping Tremere, while fortifying the Chantry against mundane and mystical assault. In 1998, Tremere lost the battle for his body with Solet. Tremere's soul fled into Etrius's body temporarily, until his master could find a more permanent solution. Number 9. Goratrix. And so we move from the right hand of Tremere to the left. Goratrix, the man who actually introduced vampirism into House Tremere. Goratrix was born sometime in the latter part of the first millennium. By some minor misunderstanding, Goratrix was going to be burned at the stake in France before Tremere, then a mage of the Order of Hermes, plucked him before the flames could consume him, sensing his talent for magic and potential for awakening. Goratrix proved to be an apt pupil as he was talented, ruthless, and determined. Yet he found himself at odds with Tremere's other apprentice, the self-righteous sycophant Etrius. It was a rivalry that would define both men, and eventually Clan Tremere as a whole. In 980 AD, Goratrix led Tremere and the Inner Council to the site of Ceoris in Transylvania, and led the ritual that would consecrate what was intended to be the capstone of a series of chantries that would harness the great magical power coursing beneath the earth. Goratrix consecrated the site himself by sawing off his own penis and testicles to bury in the soil. Don't worry though, growing a new penis is like a life 2 or 3 effect in Mage. Unfortunately, one of the members, Ponticulus, decided to upchuck his lunch during the ritual. I guess he didn't get the memo to not eat lunch before you go do sorcery. Goratrix and company descended on poor Ponticulus and hacked him to pieces. Etrius took the opportunity to fix the ritual by stuffing Goratrix's severed penis into the mouth of Ponticulus's severed head, and then burying them both beneath the heart of Ceoris. House Tremere is kind of the Bible Black of Ars Magica and Mage the Ascension. Just saying. Once Ceoris was completed, Goratrix became Regent of the Chantry, and Etrius moved in from his Chantry in Vienna, where they continued their competition for Tremere's favor. When Etrius discovered the waning of magic, along with the longevity spells that maintained the upper echelons of House Tremere, Goratrix was placed in charge of the research to find an alternative. It was during a 2-decade-long search that a series of strange events guided him towards the answer. One of the inner council who had participated in the consecration of Ceoris had been killed by parties unknown. Years later, this councillor's head was unceremoniously dropped off outside of Ceoris. Goratrix ground up the skull into a potion and imbibed it, reliving the moments leading up to the councillor's demise. The mage had been attacked, tortured, and then killed by a vampire named Roland, who was curious about his new neighbors at Ceoris and wanted to know all about them. Geez, whatever happened to a knock on the door and a gift basket? Anyway, in 1005, Goratrix took his Chantry's most able warriors and led a raid on Roland's haven. After a pitched battle, the Tremere bound Roland in magic chains, and Goratrix had him tortured with fire. It was under this sharp questioning that Roland revealed that he was a vampire of Clan Tzimisce, as well as the process for creating new vampires through the embrace. Goratrix promised to free Roland if he embraced 2 of Goratrix's apprentices, Stephen and Ferris. Needless to say, the apprentices had not been informed of Goratrix's plans to damn their souls in advance. When Roland had finished, Goratrix kept his word and freed Roland from his accursed existence. When the trio returned to Ceoris, Goratrix bid Stefan and Ferris to come and join him in his private workshops, where he secluded himself for the next 17 years. Now, the commonly accepted tale is that Tremere and his 7 counselors, who would become the first vampires of the house and clan, engaged in some alchemy and drank a potion to become vampires. The truth is somewhat uglier. In 1022 AD, when Goratrix summoned Tremere and his fellows to Ceoris to assist in the final experiment that would win them immortality, they spent 7 days and nights without sleep, engaging in complex rituals and ceremony. At the climax of these rituals, Goratrix's vampire apprentices, Stephen and Ferris, were devoured by Tremere, Goratrix, Etrius, Meerlinda, Calderon, Leduc, and the rest, torn apart and eaten like wolves on wounded deer. Their bodies convulsed in simultaneous pleasure and agony as they were changed. When they awoke, their avatars had been destroyed, and they had become vampires. It's a matter of speculation as to whether Goratrix or Tremere knew exactly what his ritual would accomplish. Tremere gave the project specifically to Goratrix, and Goratrix's laser focus suggested that he did precisely what his master intended for him to do, and that Tremere indeed meant to convert his entire house into vampires. Etrius and Calderon were prepared to kill Goratrix on the spot, but Tremere stopped them. In 1037, following the departure of Tremere and Etrius, Goratrix ruled Ceoris alone, as he had always intended. Unfortunately, Goratrix soon found himself embroiled in a near century-long war against Clan Tzimisce, who patiently but persistently chipped away at the strength of the Transylvanian Tremere. Chantry after Chantry fell until 1105 AD, when only Ceoris alone remained, as Goratrix was desperate to embrace every mage in Ceoris in order to fight the Tzimisce, but he was bound by the blood oath to Tremere not to do it. Goratrix investigated the potential of fledgling vampires, most of whom had met final death on his vivisection table, but in 1109 he had exhausted his research. He required new specimens from other clans. Goratrix embraced the men-at-arms and retainers of House Tremere, which technically did not violate Tremere's ban, and commanded them to capture members of other local clans, the Tzimisce, the Gangrel, and the Nosferatu, to face Goratrix's waiting scalpels. With the aid of the prodigious but quite mad Tremere Virstania, Goratrix managed to bring a new weapon to bear against the hated Tzimisce. In 1121, Chaundis, the first gargoyle, emerged from the womb. By 1125, enough of the Gargoyles were created to turn the tide of war against the Tzimisce. When Tremere and Etrius returned from their journeys across Europe and the Middle East with the theoretical workings of Thaumaturgy, it was Goratrix who leapt to convert theory into practical application. After the destruction of Saulat, Tremere commanded Goratrix to leave Ceoris and assume the regency of the parish Chantry, while Etrius was to take over Ceoris. Goratrix was furious at being swept out of his seat of power in favor of his hated rival, but soon found that interfering in French politics suited him far more than being cooped up inside of a Transylvanian fortress. And he had left enough cat's paws in Ceoris that he could both spy on and interfere with Etrius's rule at his leisure. But as the centuries passed, Goratrix became dissatisfied with his position in Tremere's Great Pyramid. Thanks to his spies and flunkies in Ceoris, Goratrix knew all about the war being waged within Tremere's body for control, and he lost confidence in his master. Goratrix put out tentative feelers to the Anarchs, who supposedly had discovered a means to escape the blood bond. Goratrix's greatest offense, however, was his secretive battle against the Knights Templar in France, leading to their supposed destruction by King Philip the Fair. All Goratrix accomplished, though, was to drive the Knights Templar underground, and then into the waiting arms of the Order of Reason, the same Order of Reason that would one day become the Technocracy. Tremere, in one of his waking moments, summoned Goratrix back to Ceoris to account before Tremere and the Inner Council for his actions. Instead, Goratrix fled to the Anarchs, which later became the Sabbat. But the Tremere had a parting gift for Goratrix and those who followed him into the arms of the Sword of Cain. A curse, much like the one they had placed on the Assamites, the Mark of the Betrayer, which manifested itself in any Tremere who partook of the Valdery and broke their blood bond, a brand, visible only to other Tremere, in the shape of a capital T on the forehead. Despite Goratrix's allegiance, neither he nor any of his newly minted Tremere anti-tribu, or House Goratrix, rose high in the Sabbat. The Tzimisce, after all, have long memories. This did not trouble Goratrix much, and he dutifully supplied the Sabbat with new thaumaturgical paths and rituals for their war against the Camarilla. He also dabbled in forbidden magic, including demon summoning. When the Sabbat moved its seat of power from Europe to Mexico City, Goratrix followed, establishing his personal haven in Chantry in la Universidad del Tercer Círculo de la Serpiente Dorada, or the University of the Third Circle of the Golden Serpent. Very edgy. By 1998, Tremere had lost his battle with Saulat for control of, well, whatever the hell his body had turned into. After traveling within Etrius for a time, Tremere invaded the body of Goratrix, then locked Goratrix's soul in a mirror. After which, Tremere, now wearing Goratrix's face, summoned his followers for a nice little ritual in Mexico City. As Tremere had once saved Goratrix from the stake in France, he now cast Goratrix and his house and all of the Tremere anti-tribu into a blazing inferno that lit up the night sky of Mexico City, signaling the end of Goratrix and his house. Number 8. Meerlinda. The Tremere magus Meerlinda has been a member of Tremere's Inner Council since it came into being. She was present at the consecration of Ceoris and the ritual that transformed the Inner Council into vampires. Meerlinda has ever steered the middle course between Etrius's conservatism and Goratrix's radicalism. The appearance of neutrality and sympathy kept her clear of the squabbling between the right and left hands of Tremere, and even earned their respect. She maintained her own spies and agents in both of their chantries. Despite being as ambitious and power-hungry as any Tremere, Meerlinda hates strife and prefers to cut off potential disputes at their first appearance, usually by brokering peace between the disputants. It was Meerlinda, acting as the Tremere's diplomat, who worked to rehabilitate the house and clan's image with the other clans of Cain. In 1394, Meerlinda and the Ventru Lord Hardestadt convened a meeting in Vienna for the purpose of organizing a response to the Inquisition and the Anarch revolt. There they laid the foundation for what would eventually become the Camarilla, though Meerlinda pulled back from further direct involvement with the nascent sect, preferring to act through Etrius and Mistress Fanchon, who would go on to become Clan Tremere's first Justicar. In addition to her duties as a member of the Inner Council, Meerlinda oversaw all Tremere chantries on the British Isles, and was regent of the Tremere chantry in Durham, known as the Lion's Green. As the New World was being divided and settled by the European powers, Tremere reassigned Meerlinda from the British Isles to North America. The other councillors saw this as an undesirable assignment and a sign of Tremere's disfavor. But as the fortunes of the United States rose, so did Meerlinda's. In the modern Knights, Meerlinda is the second most powerful member of the Inner Council, retains her title as Councillor of North America, and operates from her personal chantry in Dallas, Texas, but still travels extensively. Her primary project is to identify the true name of humanity. Knowing the true name of humanity would give Clan Tremere near absolute power over the entire human race. Number 7. Virstania. Virstania was born in 1060 AD in Cephis's Chantry, several hundred miles southeast of Ceoris. Despite her humble origins, her father was a Tremere man-at-arms, and her mother, Cephis's head cook. Virstania has never known life outside of the walls of a chantry. Appropriately, her first language was Latin, and she played with mages' discarded alchemical tools as her earliest toys. The head of Cephis's, Ubarra, recognized Virstania's natural talent and made the girl an apprentice at the age of 13. She rose quickly in House Tremere, becoming Cephis's youngest full mage in 1080 AD, at the age of 20. But she had been isolated from her fellow apprentices who envied her quick rise, and from her fellow mages who regarded her as more of a curiosity than an actual colleague. Despite her skill, she had trouble gathering allies or playing the game of chantry politics. Instead, she made friends of her own, literally, first by animating clay figures, then by gruesomely joining animals together in bizarre, hybrid forms. By 1105, Virstania was an aging, friendless mage secluded in a laboratory full of strange, unnatural creatures. That same year, the Tzimisce launched an attack on Cephis's, leveling the chantry and sending the survivors fleeing for their lives to Ceoris. As Virstania fled, she took her favorite hybrid, a combination of a yellow mink with the head of a sturgeon. Upon arriving at the Transylvanian chantry, she lost her pet. The creature briefly terrorized the servant girls, which drew the attention of Goratrix, who cornered the beast. As it died at his feet, Virstania expected to be reprimanded by the master of Ceoris. Instead, he recruited her for his project to develop the Gargoyles. As it was Goratrix's ambition to embrace mages as quickly as possible, he arranged for one of his allies, Brunavog, to embrace Virstania in 1111 AD. Goratrix then took over Virstania's tutelage personally. The reclusive Virstania was thrilled to not only have her ideas finally appreciated, but to work arm in arm with a member of the Inner Council as an equal and a peer. In 1121, Virstania and Goratrix created the first gargoyle, Chondis. She showered the gargoyle with the same twisted affection she gave to her mutated pets back in Cephis's, who responded to her as a baby chick would do to a mother hen. She encourages the gargoyles to think of her as a great mother and high priestess. Very island of Dr. Moreau. In 1133, when Tremere sent Goratrix to Paris, Virstania despaired. She had lost the only vampire she considered a friend in Ceoris. Whether or not Goratrix considered her as anything other than a tool in his pursuit of greater power, well, that's open to speculation. Ironically, while Goratrix is considered the arch-traitor of Clan Tremere, it was Virstania who destroyed Ceoris, at least temporarily. As time passed, Virstania identified more with the plight of the gargoyles than she did with mortals or even her fellow Tremere vampires. Near the end of the 12th century, while marshalling the Tremere's gargoyle forces in Vienna, Virstania encountered the Bruges crusader Christoph Romuald as he laid siege to the Vienna chantry. Christoph and his coterie believed they killed Virstania, but she recovered from her wounds and returned to the safety of Ceoris. In 1476, Virstania led some of her children in a revolt against the Tremere. Before escaping from the nearly ruined chantry, Virstania diablerized Curaferum, the Castellan of Ceoris, as a final insult to House and Clan Tremere. Virstania's whereabouts since the end of the Gargoyle Revolt are unknown, but it is suspected that she survived into the modern Knights as both supporter and leader of the independent Gargoyles. Number 6. Ardan of Golden Lane. Because Vampire the Masquerade Redemption holds a special place in my heart, here is a third Tremere who appeared in that game, Ardan of Golden Lane, or Ardan Lane as he became known in the modern Knights. Ardan was a native of Prague who apprenticed with an alchemist at an early age. When it was discovered that Ardan had the potential to awaken, his master sent him to study with the Order of Hermes. He found his greatest companionship among the still mortal mages of House Tremere, however, and as his studies progressed, he was summoned, without explanation, to attend the masters of the house at Ceoris. When he arrived in 1107 AD, he was ushered into the company of the elders, including the respected scholar Celestin, who embraced Ardan into the true House Tremere as a vampire. After a brief tutoring in his new nature as one of the undead, he was sent back to Prague with resources and instructions to construct a secret chantry in Prague. Ardan set up in Hradčany, the castle district of Prague, in a small house on Golden Lane. Ardan took stock of the political landscape of Prague. The Ventru, Rudolf Brandl, despite his posturing, was a mere puppet of the Premysls, who were themselves vassals of the Zamitzi, the enemies of House Tremere. Ardan made efforts to ingratiate himself to Joseph Zvi of Clan Nosferatu and Ekaterina the Wise of Clan Bruja, but his efforts were met coolly, and he could not afford to expose himself further to the scrutiny of the Hermetic mages of House Titulus, longtime rivals of the Tremere. Near the end of the 12th century, Ardan incurred the wrath of the Bruja and was paid a visit by Christoph Romuald in search of the mortal woman, Agnieszka. Romuald left Ardan near death on the lower floor of his secret chantry, but the Tremere would eventually recover. When the Gargoyle revolt was resolved and Etrius removed himself and Tremere to Vienna, Ardan was given the regency of Ceoris, or rather, what was left of it. But he worked hard to rebuild and fortify the chantry, holding it until the early 20th century, when he was summoned to Vienna to serve on the Primogen Council. Ardan served ably on the Primogen while conducting his own search for the Incunabulum Cupalum, the Book of Kupala. In 1914, as World War I reached Austria, Etrius sent Ardan back to Ceoris as the Chantry, and Eastern Europe in general, required subtle and far-seeing leadership, which Ardan had demonstrated in Vienna. During World War II, Ardan opened Ceoris as a refuge for Tremere refugees from Germany, holding the Chantry against the Germans, Russians, and the Zamitzi. When the Iron Curtain descended on Europe, Ardan reached out to form tentative alliances with the old clan Zamitzi lords who had not aligned with the Sabbat. In 1989, when the Romanian communist dictator Nicolae Ceausescu was put up against a wall and shot, Ardan quickly moved to reassert Tremere power and independence in Romania. Since then, Ardan Lane has held Ceoris against all enemies, be they Sabbat, Zamitzi, Lupines, or mortals. Number 5. Valerius Maior. Valerius was one of the legionaries whose forces were surrendered to Agrippa following the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. Like many of the forces loyal to Antony and Cleopatra, Valerius was branded a traitor to Rome by the victors and carted off back to the Eternal City as a slave. As was mentioned in the video on the top 10 vampires of Clan Assamite, the Romans liked to get a little mileage out of their executions if you were not of the patrician class. If you were going to die, you might as well die entertaining the people of Rome. Valerius was thrown into the arena with a weapon to bleed for the people's amusement. But Valerius managed to keep himself alive long enough to be taken back out and sent to the gladiator barracks for further training. But Valerius, despite his occupation in the legion and his survival in the arena, lacked a soldier's disposition. He could not detach himself from the brutality required to kill on command, nor could he take pleasure in it as some did. Valerius, by means unknown, gained the favor of his trainers and was assigned to be the Mercury of the Colosseum. After building his body up, he would go among the fallen gladiators with a hot brand and see who was truly dead or who could be healed to fight again. Those he judged too broken to fight further were given over to his partner, the Charon, who caved in their skulls with a large mallet. After a few years of this bloody service, Valerius began to delude himself into believing that he was Mercury in fact, and that the Colosseum was his Mount Olympus. where he could look down on the battles of mortals and decide who would be sent across the river Styx by Charon, the ferryman. Valerius enjoyed this time, alone in his mind with his dark fantasy, cheered on by the bloodthirsty Roman people, until he caught the eye of a wealthy nobleman named Varro, who spent an extravagant sum of money to purchase Valerius for his own use. Varro, a member of the cult of Mercury, a forerunner to the Order of Hermes, taught Valerius the rudiments of true magic. Valerius was an eager pupil, but at night, Varro used Valerius's body as an altar to dark powers, sapped his will, and prepared him as a sacrifice to Varro's true master, the demon Nubarus. Even as Valerius walked the corridors of the house by day, he always felt the cold, burning hands of Varro beneath his skin, sapping his will and violating him, body and soul. On the eve of the final ritual, Valerius kept his eyes shut as Varro raped him and waited for the end to come. And the end did come, just not as either Valerius or Varro expected. The demon Nubarus showed up earlier than expected, before Varro could complete his protective spells. Nubarus blew out a breath, and in doing so, slew every living thing in the house with cold, dark fire. Valerius prostrated himself at Nubarus' feet, or what could be called feet, but the demon simply growled at him, demanding silence. Nubarus reached out for Varro and tore the mage's soul screaming from his body with gleeful malevolence. When the demon's prize was secure, he turned to the trembling Valerius. The demon reached down and lightly touched Valerius on his tightly shut eyes. Valerius drifted off into death-like sleep as Nubarus carried off Varro's soul to the infernal realms. 16 centuries later, Valerius awoke in the ruins of a mausoleum. The Romans who came upon Varro's destroyed house believed Valerius as dead as everyone else and buried him. Valerius, now a man out of time thanks to the demon's magic, wandered Europe as a conjurer and miracle worker, before he was discovered by Clan Tremere. Lured into the house by promises of wealth and safety, Valerius studied at the Orléans Chantry in France. After a decade of such study, Valerius was embraced into Clan Tremere. As much as Valerius learned from the Tremere, they learned 10 times more from Valerius, who had extensive knowledge about the practices of the cult of Mercury, practices that the Tremere could incorporate into their own thaumaturgy. They even learned the key portions of the ritual that Varro had intended to use to siphon power from Nubarus. But at the end of the 17th century, Varro returned, spat out of the mouth of hell itself after a few centuries of torment by Nubarus. The mage's soul had a host already prepared to receive it in the body of Valerius, now a respected member of Clan Tremere. As Valerius arose in the evening, Varro seized control of the vampire's body. Tremere himself sensed the possession from his slumber and awoke, and commanded Etrius to have Valerius brought before him. Varro, like Goratrix before him, fled rather than submit to judgment by Tremere. Varro effortlessly shattered the Tremere blood bond and tracked down the Sabbat Tremere to join their ranks. Tremere bounty hunters sent to retrieve Valerius have never returned. Varro called himself Valerius Maior, or the Elder. He was a member of the Sabbat until he was exposed as a follower of the path of evil revelations. Now the Sabbat will tolerate a lot of things except for one: demon worship. Inquisitors and Templars are currently hunting Maior, but the combination of dark thaumaturgy and demonic investments have been too potent for any pursuers to overcome. Since his exile from the Sabbat, his main project was to attempt to gather all of the anathema on the Camarillus Red List together in a coterie, and then corrupt them to the path of evil revelations. Maior and the Setite Chantry corresponded for a time and betrayed each other at the first opportunity. Chantry sought the concoction of vitality from Maior, which temporarily grants life to a vampire, in exchange for information about the other vampires on the Red List. Maior sent Chantry an ensorcelled placebo, while Chantry's information was conveniently intercepted by Camarilla Archons. In 1998, when Tremere descended on his faithless servant Goratrix and burned his house to ash, Maior felt the shockwave of the ceremony in far-off Europe. It may have been that distance that saved Maior from destruction. Instead, the magic tore the demonic presence of Varro from Valerius's body, leaving him a withered shadow of what he once was. He now lacks the will and desire to use the encyclopedia of magical knowledge and infernal lore within his mind. He knows what comes in the final nights. He knows there is no escape. He was last seen in Mayfair, London with George Hammond, the vampire who rescued him from final death after the destruction of the Tremere anti-tribu. Number 4. Anastasz de Zagreb. Anastasz was born in the Kingdom of Slavonia in Croatia in the late 1840s. As the son of a wealthy textile importer, Anastasz was raised with all of the comforts a boy of the period in Central Europe could want. As with many boys, he was fascinated by the supernatural. His governess told him stories about the Zulo, who terrorized villages at night, and the hobgoblins and sluagh, who would steal his voice if he misbehaved. But these stories did not terrify Anastasz. They thrilled him, and he wondered what it would be like to speak with a Zulo in person. But his practical, pragmatic father did not approve of such fanciful thinking and dismissed the governess. Anastasz was then sent to boarding school in England. As time passed and he grew older, Anastasz became the type of man his father would approve of, yet in his heart were still the stories that the governess had entertained him with as a boy. During his first year at Oxford, Anastasz made the acquaintance of a retired stage magician at a local pub. The magician taught Anastasz legerdemain and sleight of hand, which the young man practiced diligently, more diligently than he had studied that first year. But he managed to eke through his studies and perfected his skills enough to get booked at small venues as the Imperial Magus. After graduating from Oxford, Anastasz continued his education at the London School of Economics. He also continued his study of stagecraft and magic among a secret society called the Magical Ring. While hunting the back alleys of London for an obscure bookseller, he accidentally came upon a vampire in the midst of feeding. The vampire noticed Anastasz, transfixed to the spot, and charged up the alley. Anastasz, on reflex, reached into his pocket for a packet of flash powder, tossed the powder in the vampire's face, and lit it with a ring igniter. When the powder exploded, the vampire fell back, hissing and blinded. Anastasz used that moment to flee back onto the streets and main roads. The next night, still shaken, Anastasz told his fellow members of the Magic Ring about his encounter with the Zulo his governess had warned him about. The other magicians scoffed at his story and told him to go publish it in a penny dreadful. Anastasz, deflated, returned to his apartment where he had a guest waiting for him. The vampire from the previous night was sitting in his apartment as if he lived there. The creature waved its hand and the door shut behind Anastasz. He tried to turn away, but as he locked eyes with the vampire, his body refused to respond to his mind, screaming at it to run. The vampire, with the demeanor of a patient teacher, explained to Anastasz what he was, and the truth about real magic, the very same magic that was now holding Anastasz captive. The vampire was a member of a group of once mortal sorcerers, who had cast off their frail bodies in exchange for true immortality, and sorcery born from their mystical blood. Anastasz relaxed. He was being offered true magic, not legerdemain or parlor tricks or illusions. When the vampire finished and released Anastasz, he agreed to go with him, the ways of Clan Tremere. For the next 25 years, Anastasz served as an apprentice in the Vienna Chantry, becoming a mage of tremendous power in a very short period of time. In the 1900s, the Inner Circle elected a new Tremere Justicar, who named Anastasz as one of his archons. Anastasz quickly became an authority among his peers on matters of the occult and cryptozoology. The Tremere Archon was also gregarious, open, and generous to others, making him well suited to deal diplomatically with the other clans. In 1998, the Tremere were split between several candidates for the next Justicar. One of the French regents, Jean Saint-Frédéric, offered Anastasz his name, believing he was easily controllable. Saint-Frédéric politicked for Anastasz and managed to secure the election in his favor. Anastasz is now at the center of a brewing storm within the Justicars and Archons. His mentor, Saint-Frédéric, has put him in a position that he is not ready for. But Anastasz is eager to prove himself, yet he consults Saint-Frédéric for guidance constantly. He has, unwittingly, stepped on the toes of his fellow Justicars, most notably the Bruges Justicar, Yaroslav Pachik, who has devised a small plot to either use or humiliate the Tremere. Pacek wants to conquer the Sabbat city of Montreal himself, and feeds information to Anastasz that will convince him to attack the city. If Anastasz succeeds, Pacek will swoop in to take the credit as the source of Anastasz's information. But if Anastasz fails, then the Tremere will either die or bear the blame himself. Or, if Pacek is even luckier, Anastasz will fail but leave Montreal sufficiently weakened so that he can take the city himself. Number 3. Oliver Thrace. Some people were first introduced to Vampire the Masquerade through the game Bloodlines. One of the factions in that game was the Kuei-jin, led by the Dragon Lady herself, Ming Zhao. I'll bet a few of you even fell for her bull about respect and honor, didn't you? Yeah, enjoy eternity at the bottom of the Pacific. Well, you wouldn't have had Ming Zhao in Los Angeles, or the Kuei-jin, without the help of a certain Tremere, and a particularly nasty Tremere at that, by the name of Oliver Thrace, former regent of the Hong Kong Chantry. Thrace's mortal life and early career within the Tremere are a mystery. All that is known is that he was embraced in 1496 while he was in his early 40s, and at some point lost his right eye. During his service to the Tremere in Europe, he was an implacable foe of the Sabbat, the Setites, the Assamites, and all other enemies of his clan. To all outward appearances, Thrace was an archetype of the Tremere, power-hungry, intelligent, driven, and most of all, loyal. Except that last part isn't quite accurate. Early in his career as an enforcer for the Tremere, he came upon a pack of Sabbat who followed the path of evil revelations. Thrace was intrigued. He captured one of the shovelheads alive and stripped the unfortunate Sabbat's mind of every bit of infernal knowledge, including the knowledge of dark thaumaturgy, before disposing of him. Thrace has since become a diabolist and demon worshipper par excellence. He has enhanced his knowledge of summoning and controlling spirits following a bargain with the Giovanni, one that Thrace got the better of. When Thomas Wincham, Councillor for East Asia, invited Thrace to assume the regency of Hong Kong, Thrace jumped at the chance to experiment far away from the eyes of his superior suspicions, as well as gain insights into the practices of the Kuei-jin. Since his entry into Hong Kong, Thrace has probably cataloged more information concerning the material and mystical practices of the Kuei-jin than any other Cainite. To fund his research, Thrace seized control of several powerful Hong Kong triads, filling his coffers with money gleaned from prostitution and drug trafficking. His main competitors were the 14K, a criminal triad founded by 14 members of the former Kuomintang army. In addition to his criminal empire, Thrace continued his study of infernalism. He even went so far as to make contact with two of the Yama-Kings, Mikaboshi, Lord of the Wicked City, and To-Mu, the Iron Empress of the Hell of Being Skinned Alive. Wow. Well, at least you know what you're getting when you get there. Thrace has bargained with both of the Yama-Kings in an attempt to play the two against each other. They find his efforts at supposedly subtle manipulation amusing, in the same way one finds a puppy amusing. In anticipation of the British handover of Hong Kong to the People's Republic of China, many Cainites fled the islands rather than risk conflict with the Kuei-jin. Thrace agonized over his choice. He was loath to leave Asia with his tail between his legs before he had pried loose every secret of the Kuei-jin that he could. And if he returned to the Tremere fold in Europe, it would only be a matter of time before he was discovered as a demon worshipper and killed. But if he remained in Asia, the Kuei-jin would undoubtedly kill him. Whatever other flaws existed in Oliver Thrace's character, cowardice was not among them. He petitioned the Blood Court, the ruling Kuei-jin body of Beijing and the North, for asylum, in exchange for information about the Camarilla. Now, a faction within the Kuei-jin and the Blood Court had longed for an attack on the West, to avenge the Middle Kingdom against foreigners long since dead. Thrace's offer was just the sort of intelligence they would need to plan for what they described as the Great Leap Outward. Thrace was granted asylum and began a dangerous dance with his hosts as their honored guest, or hostage. Thrace supplied the Kuei-jin with information on the Camarilla in bits and pieces, enough that they could pose a threat to the Camarilla without steamrolling them, and slowly enough that the Kuei-jin could not be certain that they had exhausted Thrace as a source of information and were free to dispose of him. Meanwhile, he devoured the Kuei-jin's libraries for information and studied the Kuei-jin as closely as he could. But Thrace's activities did not go unnoticed in the Blood Court. The court had long been infiltrated by Kuei-jin loyal to the Yama-Kings, the Akuma. An axiom is that like attracts like. Well, the Akuma could smell infernalism on Thrace, and saw him as an opportunity to bring about the prophesied Sixth Age of Creation, and the rise of a demon emperor to rule all realms. On January 1st, 1998, the first Kuei-jin landed in Los Angeles to begin the crusade against vampires, resulting in the fall of the Anarch Free State, and the recognition by the Camarilla of the Kuei-jin's claims to the areas of California they titled the New Promised Mandarinate. Meanwhile, Thrace was in contact with his Yama-King patrons, who offered him a weapon, a ritual that would destroy the Kuei-jin forever and bind the Tremere in slavery to the Yama-Kings, called the Breaking of the Demon Bonds. The world should pray that Oliver Thrace never escapes Beijing, or he will use the ritual and plunge the earth into a living hell. Number 2. Joseph Ravenfeather. Now you may hear the term Anarch Tremere and think, absolutely not. That's fair. The whole point of the Tremere Pyramid and the Mark of the Betrayer is to prevent any of Tremere's little ducklings from wandering off without his permission. Now wrap your brain around the term Anarch Regent. A good Tremere would look at you as though you had smoking turds hanging out of your mouth. And yet, Joseph Ravenfeather is, or was known during the period of the Anarch Free States, as the Anarch Regent of San Diego. Joseph Ravenfeather was born on the Viejas Reservation in sunny Southern California. Early on, he devoted himself to the practice and preservation of his people's shamanic ways, even as they were dying out from simple disinterest. He was surprised when he learned that the old ways still worked, or at least he thought they worked. When he spoke to the spirits, they spoke back. When he entered trances, he visited strange places that could have been spirit realms. Whether his visions and visits were actual transcendent experiences or drug-induced hallucinations, none could really say. Joseph's occult skills were lacking, to say the least. Truthfully, they could be generously described as childish fumbling. But he had raw power and dedication, the two most important ingredients in the creation of any mage. And it was Clan Tremere who first took notice of Joseph Ravenfeather before the traditions or the technocracy could recruit him. The Tremere embraced Joseph Ravenfeather in 1944. His transition to undeath was not an easy one. He struggled to reconcile his mortal spirituality with his new state as an immortal bloodsucker. In time, he adapted to existence as a vampire by modifying the spiritual practices of his mortal life to his new condition. He fed on peyote-addled vessels to induce visions, and performed ritual scarification under the light of the moon. In time, he gained knowledge of the thaumaturgical path of spirit manipulation. In the same year that Joseph was embraced, California fell into the hands of the Anarchs, who established their doomed free state and threw most of the Camarilla power brokers out. When he had completed his tutelage under his sire, he moved to San Diego, a short 30-minute drive from the Viejas Reservation. The Anarchs of San Diego weren't entirely sure of what to make of Joseph. He didn't check off any of the typical Tremere boxes: uptight, secretive, treacherous, and generally unsettling. In time, he became respected, if not entirely trusted, among the San Diego Anarchs. Later, Joseph petitioned his superiors for permission to establish a Chantry in San Diego, which they granted without much hesitation. When the bourgeois Tara Kearney changed sides from the Anarchs to the Camarilla, Joseph supported her. Some of the Anarchs kicked up a fuss about this, but Joseph made it clear that he would not act as the Camarilla's enforcer against them. He supported the newly minted Prince Tara when he considered it appropriate, and he lobbied for the Anarchs' grievances to Tara. Joseph had also been sending information on the Anarchs to his superiors in the clan for decades, mostly concerning their general plans and overall mood. As regent of the San Diego Chantry, Ravenfeather has 3 apprentices under him, each with varying degrees of skill and Anarch sympathy. His most pressing project in the modern Knights is the Kuei-jin, who have taken residence in Los Angeles and San Francisco. His mastery of spirit manipulation has given him some keen insights into the Cathian invaders and the spirit allies who seem to have traveled across the Pacific Ocean with them. If the Kuei-jin decide to turn their attention to San Diego, Joseph wants to have a nice, warm reception ready for them. Number 1. Aisling Sturbridge. I conclude this list with one of the fastest rising stars of Clan Tremere, Aisling Sturbridge. Sturbridge was born in 1890 in upstate New York to a wealthy banker and his wife. Sturbridge's mother died in 1892, and Mr. Sturbridge, rather than allow his wife's meddling family to attempt to raise Aisling, allowed her to run wild with her brothers. During her youth, Aisling had a curiosity for mysticism and a talent for autodidacticism, so she taught herself Greek and Latin in order to read the occult texts she cajoled her older brother to borrow for her from the church library. She attended seances and corresponded with numerous occultists, most of whom were unaware that they were consulting with a teenage girl. When her mother's family became aware that Aisling had received an invitation to join something called an enlightened society, they browbeat her father into sending her off to finishing school in London, a city even more drenched in Victorian spiritualism and occultism than America. And this is why you don't listen to nosy, childless people about raising kids, nor should you outsource your kids to third parties. Anyway, back to business. Predictably, Aisling fell in with the occult scene in London, drawing the eye of one Aleister Crowley before he became a Malkavian. She also attracted the attention of a Tremere named Lucien de Maupassant, a sort of freelance Tremere, who, while part of the pyramid, was not attached to any particular chantry. Lucien and Aisling became confidants as the Tremere assessed her potential to join the clan. He whisked her away from London and Aleister Crowley's lecherous schemes for a year-long tour of Europe and the Middle East. In truth, it was an extended interview session to see if the young woman had what it took to succeed in a clan as cutthroat as the Tremere. At the end of the tour in Vienna, Lucien brought Aisling to the main chantry to embrace her and familiarize her with the heart of Tremere power. For the next 30 years, Aisling accompanied Lucien as a Tremere freelancer, delivering sensitive messages, building chantry libraries, investigating matters of concern to the Inner Council. World War II saw them split for a time, as Aisling worked in the libraries at the chantries of Nuremberg, Warsaw, Krakow, and Dresden. The local Tremere were of divided opinions on her. She objected rather strenuously to the bargains and compromises that some of her superiors made with the German Reich, but she also risked her existence to preserve the treasures and artifacts of chantries targeted in the war. In 1948, Lucien disappeared, supposedly while on assignment from the Inner Council. Meerlinda, Councillor for North America, invited Aisling to her domain to assist the region of Atlanta, Georgia. Despite time and distance, Aisling still expends resources to locate Lucien, who she is convinced is still alive. Aisling was abruptly summoned to the Chantry of the Five Boroughs in New York in the 90s, to serve the High Regent of that city. Her reassignment might have been a blessing in disguise, considering the Sabbat conquest of Atlanta. When the Sabbat reduced the former High Regent of New York to a fine powder and then spread said powder across the bay in 1996, Aisling was effectively field promoted into the position of High Regent at the ripe old age of 80 or so years, a veritable child prodigy by vampire standards. As to why anyone would promote a fledgling bordering on an ancilla to a high post, well, New York at the time was still Sabbat territory. Aisling was popular enough to be respected, but young enough to be expendable should the Sabbat actually manage to bring down the Chantry of the Five Boroughs. But Aisling was familiar with the Tzimisce from her time in Eastern Europe, and she spent the next few years fortifying the Chantry and stockpiling resources for a protracted fight. When the word came down of the Camarilla's intent to invade New York, Regent Sturbridge was ready. From within her heavily fortified chantry, Sturbridge and her warlocks countered the activities of the Sabbat in the city, leaving them exposed for the Camarilla's Justicars and Archons to fight on the street. Regent Sturbridge won her share of honors from the Battle of New York, and there were whispers that Meerlinda might even elevate Sturbridge to lordship over New England. And that was the top 10 vampires of Clan Tremere. Omitted purposefully were a certain German Tremere who was active in the 1930s and 40s and had, unfortunate National Socialist leanings. as well as a certain codependent, serial-killing, necrophiliac Tremere from Milwaukee who insists that the clan has a hard-coded misogyny, despite all evidence to the contrary. And drone strikes? In Vienna? Really? The Vienna Chantry survived 52 bombing runs by the Soviets during World War II. The master of the Chantry warded the entire city so that any lupine who so much as sets a toe in Vienna, the Tremere will be aware of it, and promptly proceed to wreck their furry asses. The same Tremere protect their most important chantries with mercenaries, ghouls, gargoyles, homunculi, and the types of body horrors that would make a Tzimisce reluctantly nod in approval. But somehow, the Vienna Tremere got ganked by Le Drone Strike, some SOCOM ninjas, and a few priests. Okay, sure, let's go with that. Anyway, speaking of Clan Tzimisce, the true progenitors of Clan Tremere, mind you, they are next up to get a video on their top 10 members. And boy oh boy, I've been waiting to say some things about the fiends of the Carpathians. Until next time.